Thanks for tuning into Upward Way Podcast. If you're looking to be spiritually blessed, moved, and inspired, there is no doubt you are in the right place. On our show, guests recount their encounter with Christ and how their lives have been transformed through the grace and love of God. And now, please welcome our host.
Hello and welcome to Upward Way. I am your host, Marlon Walters. My guests today are the founders of the Artisan Grower, Robert and Michelle Sullivan. Welcome to Upward Way.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
It is indeed my pleasure to have you here today. And I know I can promise my listeners that you are in for quite a journey. So for you, Robert and Michelle, I just wanted you to walk us through your life a bit. Maybe, where did you grow up? How were things like for you as children? So I don't know who wants to go first, but you could start there and then we will get deeper into things.
Yeah, I'll let my wife go first, ladies first.
Okay, very gentleman of you.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, so as a child, yes, I grew up in, how do I put it, in Reading, Berkshire, in the UK, United Kingdom. And Reading is really about 30-40 minutes, if that, from Windsor Castle, which is also in Berkshire, which is one of the residences of the Queen, just to give some perspective. So I grew up with my mother at first, because my parents had broken up before I was born even. Both my parents are from a secular background. My mother, she's an Anglo-Irish lady, born of Irish parents, but she was born in London. And my dad, he was, what do you call him, like a first generation Black Caribbean. So he came over in the 60s to the UK from St. Vincent. And he was born and raised in Aruba mainly. I just had a normal, I suppose to a certain extent, a normal life from the age of 9 onwards. And then there's not really much to say, to be honest. It's pretty standard. My dad was a DJ. He used to take me with him from the age of about 9, 10-ish. My mum was a typical Irish woman. She used to love to go out to the pub and drink and, have a jolly. And that's, she would smoke, and that was just her life. And that was my dad's life pretty much. So that was it really for me. I had no religious background at all, although I was very interested in religious things, to the point where I went to church one day on a Sabbath. And I knew that my dad would be against it because he was not religious at all. He'd run from religion. And I remember telling my stepmom at the time that I had gone, and I said, "Oh, don't tell my dad." And she did. And so when my dad found out that I'd gone to the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Reading, I was grounded every Sabbath. I wasn't allowed to go out on a Saturday. So I used to be allowed to go into town, and that's what he thought. I caught the bus to go into town. But I did go into town, but then I walked up to the church to meet a friend. So that didn't quite go down too well. I also was quite interested in
astrology.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, there was a church that was nearby that I wanted to go to, but, I never really knew when they opened and things like that. And then I remember it must have been about 14, 15, praying and saying to God, even though I didn't really know how to pray properly, but I did pray and said to God that I really wanted to marry somebody who was religious and had a religious family. And when I was 16, I met Robert. And Robert happened to be a Seventh-day Adventist.
Yeah, well, one of sorts.
Of sorts. 1 foot in the church and 1 foot out.
Yeah.
Just before we transition into Robert, you mentioned your father, Michelle, being a DJ. Just want to clarify, was it that he was a disc jockey or was he the type as we would refer in Jamaica when you said DJ?
Disc jockey, yes.
Okay, all right.
He was a disc jockey, yeah.
All right, because just for the sake of those who might be listening, in Jamaica, persons will talk about DJ. They are not necessarily disc jockeys, but they are really artists. But it's just the kind of songs or their production, they just refer to them as DJ. Okay, so over to you now, Robert. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. It was good to clarify.
Actually, I can clarify it even further and say that my dad was a little bit of an artist too. I mean, he was a disc jockey, but he was also a professional drummer, and he was quite into calypso music and things like that. So
yeah, that's right. So I was born in London, spent the early years in London, and then my parents separated, and my mum took myself and my sister to Hampshire, Basingstoke, and so we grew up in Basingstoke. And my mum was a Seventh-day Adventist, so my early recollections was always being involved in church and going to church. That was, every Saturday. That's just how it was. My father, who I didn't grow up with, but strangely enough, his parents and his brothers and sisters, strange enough, they are all Seventh-day Adventists, but he's not. And strangely,
he grew up that way.
He grew up that way.
He just chose not to practice.
Yeah. And strangely enough, he also he also liked music quite a bit and would also DJ as well.
Disc jockey. He was also a disc jockey.
yeah, which is strange. But anyway, so I always grew up going to church. Sabbath was always the thing. Lots of friends. I always had a good experience going to church. Having that extended family there was always really nice. But I would have to say, all during that time, since being a little person to late teens, early 20s, mid 20s, and even a little bit later, actually. Yeah, much later, actually. I never had a relationship with God. I never had an experience with God. All I knew was that on Sabbath, you go to church, and what would normally happen is that, during the week, our family and other families would just do whatever we did during the week. And then whether you're school, whether you're at college. And then when I started working, you just did whatever you did during the week. But then on Sabbath, you went to church. And then Sabbath afternoon / evening, soon as sunset goes down, then you switch back on the TV and life continues as usual. So that's what I knew. And that's how I grew up, and that's what I thought that was life, and I thought that was how things were going to be until Jesus comes again and would take me and I would go to heaven and I would just continue from there. That was my upbringing, and that's what I thought. Yeah.
Yes, that is indeed a very interesting start to the journey. As you shared, there were a few things in common, one being that your parents were both, your dads were both DJs. So as it relates to your coming together, I know Sister Michelle had started out by telling us that at 16, she met Robert. So, was he like the knight in shining armor? How did things unfold?
Of course.
No, I don't really think I wasn't in the market for, I wasn't looking for anybody in particular. I was friends with his friend at the time, but that was probably about it. But I think it was more that you were looking. I mean, you were looking at me. I wasn't necessarily looking at you.
Yeah.
But maybe that's the way it should be.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the guys that should be looking. But I was just minding my own business, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah.
So, but I was quite young. And so, it's not that I would recommend the listeners go about looking or starting relationships with young men at the age of 16.
No.
I had a bit of a different background to some degree, and even so, it probably still wouldn't be an excuse. But, my father was quite abusive, and my auntie had found out about the abuse that had taken place and involved social services. And I think actually I was I mean, I'd met you at
Yeah, we were
16,
kinda
but I think
dating.
at this time it was 17. A few months had passed and my birthday had happened. And then the social services basically told my auntie and myself, and I think you came to the meeting, that I could have actually left home. And so that's exactly what I did. And I was offered to be with my auntie or to go with Robert. And of course, you know, you ask a 16, 17-year-old girl who she wants to be with. And you know, I chose to be with Robert. And so thankfully we've been together ever since. And so, you know, you know, the stories don't always end that well. And that's why I'd like to caveat this with this is an exception, and it's just the mercy of God. And it's definitely not the way that we should go about making plans for your life.
But God is merciful. And we're thankful for that. But we're just being as open and honest and as candid as possible with you, so that you and your viewers can have an idea as to what our background was and where we were coming from.
Yeah, and so so that was my side of things. I mean, I wasn't, as I said, I wasn't specifically looking, but maybe you have a different story to tell.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was looking to, as it were, you know, settle down, this sort of thing. So, you know, that was definitely on the cards. You know, and I think part of that was my sort of upbringing in the church. You know, I mean, I wasn't sort of, you know, one of those guys sort of out there, you know, different girls dating or girlfriends and all of that sort of thing. So I was sort of looking to try and settle down in my own little world.
Yeah, I think a friend of mine, when I was sort of meeting up with Robert and things like that, you know, here and there, I think there were a couple of questions that he had asked me. And one of the questions was, oh, can I meet your parents? And so I kind of freaked out at the thought, because I know that my dad would definitely not be having any of this. And so I told my friend, I was like, what am I going to do? He's asking to meet my parents. And she turned around and she says, oh, Michelle, she says, I think he wants a bit of marriage. That's exactly how she said it. He wants a bit of marriage. And that I think that scared me all the more. Oh dear. Yeah.
I love the disclaimer that you put out. It's not the recommendation that at 17, 18, you jump into a relationship, but that is how things are in the real world, you know, for many persons. And we are not sure as to how different circumstances will lead. But as you have just said, it is only for the grace and mercies of God. So I'm going to fast forward a bit before I will maybe reverse. You're the founders of the Artisan Grower. Now, that might sound like a lot for many persons, but of course, I don't know what this is. I'm just going to pretend as though I don't know what the Artisan Grower is all about. So I'm just going to lay the table before you, or lay the land before you, for you to just share with us what is the Artisan Grower really all about.
The Artisan Grower is our farm that we started. This farm, or this business that we have, was really a blessing from the Lord. It was really his answer to the question that we had, what would thou have us to do, Lord? It's an occupation that he has given us. It's not something that we just woke up one day and said to ourselves, oh, let's farm. It came about from wilderness wanderings. Let's put it that way.
Since we picked up our family and moved to the countryside, which we'll get into, that's a whole nother conversation.
So basically it's a market garden. And it started out as, you know, very small, just under an acre. And then it kind of grew to a larger, and we'll cover this as we go through our little bit of a story. As you said, you wanted to go forward, to go backwards. So, you know, but I'll tell you what it is. It's a farm that's on a 10-acre piece of land. And basically it supplies catering company.
And we'll supply hotels.
We'll supply some hotels that we've been asked to provide for. And it supplies us with an income, I suppose, and it gets us outside. And it's
and just to add to that, so we grow. We don't grow organically, as most people know. We use a method what we call veganic growing. So it means that we don't use any animal inputs for fertilization. It's just a choice that we decided to make. So we don't use any fertilizers or amendments that have got like fish blood and bones and things like that. Also, we grow microgreens, which we've stopped because we've just moved, but we'll get that production going again. And we also grow edible flowers as well.
That's right.
So it's not just the vegetables, but we also do edible flowers as well.
And one thing we'd like to be able to add to our menu, so to speak, is cut flowers.
Cut flowers.
And this year coming, we hope to have honey as well.
Yeah.
So that yeah.
Yeah. So it's a big project, but we've seen the Lord work in mighty ways, opening doors where we couldn't have opened and bringing opportunities which we couldn't have even dreamed of. We've seen him do miracles which we couldn't have orchestrated. So we know definitely hand on heart that this is God's leading, and that's what we do. So that's the artisan grower.
In essence, just to make sure nothing has been missed. So in essence, you have a farm, and you have your own produce, and from that you are able to supply those who have a need, correct? In
Correct.
the simplest of senses.
Yeah.
Well, wonderfully, it sounds simple, and the reason I decided to ask it that way, because you indicated briefly that you took your family and you head to the countryside. So before I get into that part of the journey, did any of you had farming experiences before?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. And no experience before, none at all. And that has been a whole big lesson as well, because I believe this is one of the joys in that God wants us to lean on him more. And it's not to say that, if you've got a certain experience, that God can't use that, because God can do whatever he needs to do. But at the end of the day, even if you've got a particular skill, God still wants you to lean on him for the answers. And so it makes us more so that we have to lean on him. We have to get the answer from him because we didn't have any experience. I mean, obviously, we did a lot of research. We did a lot of reading. We bought lots of books and lots of YouTube videos. But at the end of the day, with something as practical as agriculture growing, you've got to just put seed in the ground, and you've got to put your Wellington boots on, and you've got to get muddy, and you've got to get your hands dirty. You just got to learn by experience. And through this, we can see glimpses of really the Christian walk. It's really like what is it I'm trying to say?
Pilgrim journey?
Yeah, kind of like the pilgrim journey. You can see that being built out, because every day is something different, and every day you move forward, but then sometimes things knock you back. You have to get back up. You have to keep on continuing. And it's just like the Christian walk. Not every day is a huge success, but then the next day it might be, quite a downer. But then you don't leave yourself in the down and the doldrums. You pick yourself up, you read some of God's promises, and then you continue, and you go forward again in faith, and claiming those promises. So we can see similarities, but it's a really, really nice experience. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes, wonderful. And, some ideas are popping up in my head, and I don't want to preempt myself too much, but as you just outlined, you can see similarities between the walk of faith or just life itself with just spending time in the soil, because, a seed is planted in a literal sense. And with the spiritual, it's the same. A seed is planted, and over time, there is growth. Sometimes there is no growth, because of maybe the weather and, the nutritional balance. And it's the same in our spiritual sense. If our spiritual nutrition is not good, or if there's none, then there is no growth. I want to give you a chance to speak a little to the logo that you have there. Usually a logo is not maybe mentioned during, a session, but someone looking at your logo, when I looked at it, the thought similar to what you had in mind came about. But someone will look at it and, okay, here's a plate, there's a knife, and there's a fork. But that is not that's not of the logo, right? It means something else, some physical toil. So could you just share a bit about the logo, and also as it relates to from the farm, to the plate, what could be the significance of that as well?
Yeah, again, a very, very good point. And it's good that you noticed that. As a matter of fact, I think you're probably the first person
No, there has been others.
who's mentioned that, but have they actually seen what it is? Normally people say, oh, your logo, it's a knife and a fork.
Oh yeah, sorry. From that point of view, I thought, yeah,
Yeah,
but
that's
he's the
right.
first one that's realised that actually
It isn't a knife and a fork.
Not a knife and a fork.
Yeah,
no,
that's right.
It's actually hand tools.
Yeah.
It's a hand shovel and a hand fork. And so when we first started out with the farming, we were using really nothing much more than hand tools. But we have, because the farmers got bigger and there's a lot more to do, we've now introduced a tractor. So now,
but it's not a big tractor. It's what we call a compact tractor. It's a small little tiny tractor, just so that we can rotate our beds and this, that, the other.
Yeah.
But yeah, we wanted this whole idea of you might have heard, people talk about farm to fork. So it's this whole idea that, whatever you grow, that's going to be nutrient dense and it's going to be of the best quality, that's the stuff that's going to be on your table, and whether you eat it raw or whether you cook with it, but still, the nutrients are going to be really good. So it's this whole idea of just keeping it simple. We wanted not just our growing methods, but we wanted everything about us just to be quite simple. And we found that this particular logo, which we really made ourselves, what it portrayed, I think, was just something very, very simple. But it is like you said, it is a fork and knife if you're looking at it just casually, but it's really garden tools that are going to be used. And obviously the plate is just to represent, eating from the land. Yeah. So there is a lot in there. So I'm glad that you noticed that.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. So now to the, I would say, juicier part. Now you spoke about, or there was hint about picking up your family heading to the countryside. Now that in itself is what I'd consider a faith journey or a leap of faith. I'm sure with no farming experiences, as you outlined, there would be a lot of uncertainties. And so as you share about, this move, I would want you to also, if you can, put in it the idea of, moving into the unknown from a faith perspective.
We can do that.
Yeah.
So basically, we were together, 17, I think you were, I don't know how old you are, I can't really remember, but 23, 22, 22, I think. Anyway, we got married when I was 19 and you were 25 or something along those lines. And then we had, before we got married, we had our eldest son. And then after we got married, a year later, we had our daughter. Let me do female and male. So we have a 30-year-old son, a 28-year-old daughter, a 19-year-old son, a 15-year-old son, 12-year-old daughter, 9-year-old daughter, and 5-year-old daughter. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I don't know why I just counted 8 fingers, but it's 7 children. As time progressed, we did the usual thing. We were working. We worked our way up the ladder. Robert was working within the telecommunications industry, and likewise myself as well. Robert was a business consultant within telecommunications, and I was project coordinating / project management. And we were just living life in the normal way. And we sent our children to school. We did private school and things like that. We paid for them to have, the best education and things like that. And then what happened is we noticed that the things weren't great. As much as, we were earning good money, let's put it that way. We were both on 6-figure incomes.
But what happened was, Mark and Noel.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Do you want to explain that? So basically, we were working and just living life normally. And then there was a bit of a tragedy in the sense that the friend that I had that introduced me to Robert, his 2 younger brothers were killed in a car crash, and they were quite close to us. Obviously, Robert grew up with them within the church, and I came to know of the church and Robert through this family. So I think Noah would have been coming up to 20 years old, and I think Mark was probably about 27 or something like that. And yeah, they were killed in a car crash, and I think that was a bit of a life changer.
Yeah, that was a bit of a shocker, because we were at church at the time. It was a Sabbath when they died, when we got the message.
Yeah, we were actually looking after Mark's daughter. We had his daughter with us, and she would have been about 5 or something. And
I just remember thinking, wow, because I knew, even though they were going to church, but, straight after going to church, they would be going out and partying and whatnot. And so would I be. So in my mind, I said to myself, prior to this, I used to think to myself that when Jesus comes, this is what I used to think. When Jesus comes, I used to think, well, I go to church, and I go to church on the Sabbath. So surely when Jesus comes, I'm going to be going to heaven. That's what I thought. I didn't really think much about it, but that's what I thought. So anyway, so when our friends died, I thought to myself, it was the Holy Spirit, but I didn't know anything about this. But at the time, I just thought to myself, I don't think they're going to be going to heaven, because I knew the lifestyle that they had. And then I suddenly thought to myself, well, hold on a minute. If they're not going to be going to heaven, what about me? Because I've got exactly the same lifestyle, maybe even worse. And so,
although as a disclaimer, if the family were to hear this, we don't obviously know whether they will or not. No. That's obviously down to God. But I think
this is just how my mind was working. And I think the Holy Spirit was just trying to get through to me that something wasn't right. Because at this time, I didn't have a walk with the Lord. I didn't know Jesus. I didn't know the Lord as my savior or anything like that. I just went to church. I was just going through the motions. So shortly after that, we moved from the area that we were in, and we ended up in an area
which is about 45 minutes north of where we were living. And we lived there we live in this town, Milton Keynes, for 7 years. And it's quite interesting what happened, because whilst we were living there, so many things happened. I don't know whether you want to touch very quickly on your, our son, he was about 14. This is some years in of being in Milton Keynes, probably about, 2/3 of the way into being in Milton Keynes. And our eldest son, he was running away from home and just, he's just really taking us through a lot of grief and issues at the time. And it came at a time when actually I started reading a lot more of Ellen White, because at the time that Mark and Noel died, the following year and month, 1 year, 1 month, 1 day later, my dad died, and he died of motor neurons disease. And a lot of people at the time were sort of saying, you could get it and things like that. And I was quite fearful, I think. And so I started to read Ministry of Healing. We missed this bit, but in the early 90s, Robert got rebaptized and I got baptized into the Adventist church. And so we'd be giving, the baptismal package, which had all these books in it, and Ministry of Healing was one of them.
But we'd never read any of them. No, but they were just sitting there on the shelf.
So all those years. And so I decided to pick it up and read it, because my dad had died, looking for answers like, I just didn't want to die of motor neurons disease, let's put it that way. And from there, it just sort of led me to read other things. And shortly after moving to Milton Keynes, I also read the Bible. I was reading through the Gospels, and I just basically, I don't know what happened, but I just kind of started on a conversion experience, really. I remember sitting on the landing, reading through the Gospels, and got to the point where Jesus was being crucified. And I remember sitting on the landing, everybody in the house was asleep. I'd sit up late at night and read it, 11 o'clock at night, whatever. And I remember sitting on the landing and crying because he'd been crucified and all of this. And I was really into this. And, I stopped sort of listening to some music at the time. And I was listening to sort of, I don't know, like I was listening to a Christian radio station when I'd be in the car and things like that, just a slight change of what I was used to. And, it was just like an awakening, really. And so that kind of led me into reading more of Ellen White's writings. and coming across ministries as well that were very helpful to me, like Empowered Living Ministries and Restoration International and things like that, and started to read some of their articles and ordering some DVDs and just started to see that, wait, as a Seventh-day Adventist, the life that we're living here in this town is not the true picture of what God actually wants for his people. I could see that. And I remember reading a book called, what was it?
Country?
No, Raising Your Child by the Spirit by Sally Holmberger. And then I also watched their Country Living. They had like a little video by Jim Holmberger, seeing that they had sold everything and gone out to the mountains of Montana to raise their boys. And it just seemed like such an eye-opener. They said they had no television because the window was the television, and outside they would see the deer and rabbits and bears. And I was just like, whoa, wow. What is this? And for the first time ever, it just opened my eyes to this just different way of living, a country living. It was just such an amazing thought process for me, and I remember Robert would be there in the living room watching TV. And I'm there reading these books, becoming enlightened, and there he is over there watching movies, and I'm thinking to myself, something's not right here. He's watching movies, but these people are watching deer and bears through their window. It just hit my heart. And I was like, this is what I want for my family. And so then I had the task of trying to convince Robert of this, but I didn't really, did I? I mean, I didn't, not that I didn't convince you, but I didn't really sort of come upon you with some sort of, come on, we got to do this. It was not like that. It was very organic, the way it all sort of happened. Because it came at a time actually where you started to sort of take your faith a little bit more seriously, because I was praying a lot. I was praying a lot for him.
And what happened was, I think it was there's a ministry in the United Kingdom called Ministry Helps.
Ministry Helps, yeah.
Ministry Helps, which is run by a retired Adventist couple.
Jack and Joy Rain.
Yeah, and they live in rural Wales. And they do a ministry where it's sort of DVDs, CDs, and booklets and pamphlets. Anyway, they said that there was these sort of series that were taking place in the North England Conference. This is within a conference in the United Kingdom, where they would have speakers over from America and just different international speakers, but they were really quite sort of very spiritual. And they said, I think you guys, they said we should go, we should try and attend some. So we did.
Yeah, we did. And at the time, it was David Gates, Ivor Myers, Stephen Bohr.
This was back in the day. It was David Asherit. There
was quite a few people that were attending.
Jeffrey Rosario.
So we started to but there was one in particular, wasn't there, with David Gates, and he was giving his testimonies of his walk with the Lord. It just blew our minds. We were
well, the first two things, let me just say, was that when Pastor Ivor Myers was here, he was doing a whole Daniel and Revelation thing. And we were in the audience right at the front. And I remember he was talking about different beasts, this beast coming out of the sea and that beast. And I remember people around us were saying, Amen. Amen.
Or they would finish, he would start like, a verse and they would finish it. And we were sat there looking like,
what on earth is he talking about? Beast? What on earth is it? To me, it just sounded like gobbledygook, because I had never, ever heard anything like this in my life. You have to remember, I was just used to going to church, coming home and just getting on with my life, doing what I'm doing. All of a sudden, we're at this meeting with these serious people who are talking, present truth and three angels messages. I mean, we say it now, but it's like, you got to imagine, this was just like speaking a different language.
Yeah.
It was speaking a different language. But anyway, Pastor David Gates was there, and he was sharing his testimonies of how he was walking with the Lord. And as he was speaking, my heart was being pricked, because for the first time, this is the first time I had heard anyone talking about God as he was a friend,
and as he was sat right next to him,
like he's a real person. Like most of the time when growing up in church, it's like you pray to God,
he's all the way up there.
He's all the way up there. You read about God in the stories of the Bible, but no pastors, elders had related a story with themselves with God. It was just, they're just reading the Bible and that's it. But here is this guy, Pastor Gates, and he's talking about God in a way that was relatable. He was giving these testimonies of how he would pray to God for his, he would claim promises from the Bible and God would actually answer these promises. And I was like, this is unbelievable. You have to imagine in my mind, I was like, this is unbelievable. And I said to myself, not like physically, but I said in my mind, I said, this is the kind of relationship I want to have with God. I want to have a real relationship with him. I don't just want to go through the motions. So this is what I said in my mind. I guess it was like a crying out. And that prayer was answered and would be tested.
Yes, it's true. And, there was one thing that David Gates said that we remember, and he said to put all on the altar for God. Put your job, put your family, your children,
your education,
your money, your education, everything. Just put it all on the altar.
In other words, put God first in everything that you do. It's like, come to God and just, hey, look, here I am, Lord. I'm a second year medical student, but I'm actually now saying to you, Lord, what do you want me to do? I know I want to be a doctor, but I'm now asking you, Lord, you tell me what you want me to do. Because, the Bible says he's got plans. Right. Before we were even formed, he had plans. So it's like, well, what are those plans specifically, Lord?
And that was
what
just
plan?
an example, by the way.
I'm just giving an example.
A second year medical student.
No, I wasn't a second year. But it's just this principle and this idea. And we'd never heard. And it's like, I was like, yeah, of course. Well, why not? Because all of a sudden it was like, yeah, Christ has died for me. Yeah, we're moving on.
Yeah. And so with that, we just saw a completely different way of life, and our eyes had been opened spiritually. The Rain family invited us to come to their house. They were living in the countryside at the time, and we went. And then we went to a water into wine retreat, and we felt convicted at the time that we wanted to.
It was like a marriage retreat.
It was a marriage retreat, yeah. And we felt convicted that, God really wanted to love us, and he wanted to
bless us.
Yeah. And it was at that retreat that we decided that we would homeschool our children. So that's something that we chose to do. Our son was home again, and we decided that we weren't going to send him back to school because we felt that was the root of all the evils, one of the roots of all the evils. Not that we're against schools, but for him, it just wasn't a good match. And so we were on a journey, and God wanted to teach us to trust him,
That's right.
And so if we have time, there's a couple of testimonies that we can share that brought us to farming, really. Do we have time to share those?
I suspect, we will need a part 2 to unpack some more of the story. And, if you could promise a part 2, then of course, later on, we'll organize it as well.
Yeah. No, that's fine.
We've been talking with Robert and Michelle Sullivan, my guest today on Upward Way. They are the co-founders of the Artisan Grower. I must promise that we will have a second interview with them sometime in the future. So please stay in tune for that. You've been in tune to Upward Way. Do join us again next week when we'll have another interesting guest sharing his or her story of faith. Subscribe to weekly episodes on the Apple, AWR, Loud Voice, Spotify, Stitcher, or Podcast Guru apps. You're also welcome to visit Upward Way Facebook page, click like, and leave a comment. Until then, I am Marlon Walters saying goodbye. May God bless you.
You've been listening to the Upward Way podcast, the #1 audio production show for people who want encouragement and reassurance in a muddled world.